Om Sri Mahaganathipataye Namaha. Om Sri Saraswati Namaha. Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Namo Bhagavate Buddhaya. Greetings and welcome to all of you who have interest in listening to these introductory thoughts on the Buddhist system of acquiring knowledge. As I spend a lot of time on studying various books on the Buddhism, along with the books on the Upanishadic teachings, my conviction that one should take up a systematic study, almost like a university study, book by book, and dwell on the concepts laid out there, not with a mere academic interest whereby one may acquire a university degree, but as a way to using those systematic developments into transforming oneself. Such a systematic study is surely needed, as it is done in the sannyasa tradition, in the ashramas, where we commonly hear the word sannyasya adhyayanam kuryat. Having renounced, one should do study. Such is the instruction for a sannyasi. Same way, the Buddhists also spend enormous amount of time trying to study the various scriptures of the Buddhistic thought. I believe only such a systematic and committed study will at least take a person after a few years of struggle to a balanced mind, and then really be able to do those practices with intelligence, not as a mere mechanical process, though everything might have its own benefits. To that extent, we find great men, the professors of the university systems, who have dedicated for the study, writing, and many of them have even adopted a way of living in conformity with those teachings. One of such great names we hear in the Buddhistic tradition is one Professor Edward Conze. Conze. So I have been greatly inspired by him. Of course, he passed away in sometime in 1978 or so, 76 or 78. 1976, I guess. He was a professor in the Berkeley University in the last 10 plus years of his career. A German born who was raised in the UK, studied in the UK, and worked and taught in the universities in UK, and spent a great amount of time in the spiritual practices. He was also a professor in the University of Berkeley and so on, and many others. Maybe when we read the introductory book, we'll get to know all that. So I wish to introduce to all of you this great book, an introductory book which is called Buddhist Thought in India, Edward Conze. This has 4 sections, and they are divided with 4 different titles. The first part is called the archaic Buddhism, meaning the original Buddhism. Number 2, the Sthaviras. The Sthaviras, that is one of the divisions in the 18 different sects of Buddhist thought. And the third is the Mahayana, and it has further notes on Buddhist logic and tantras, which are more, I would say, Tibetan versions of it. This is supposed to be a quintessence of Professor Conze's 30 plus years of his teaching career, and at the end of it he wrote this introductory book. Of course, which he wrote saying that he planned for it to write as a summary of all his career understanding. So to that extent, this book is very packed and very helpful. It is not an easy read, but certainly it is rewarding. And if somebody is willing to go along with it, trying to understand every sentence, every concept, and gain some insight, they can practice, whether it be the Upanishadic teaching or the Buddha Vachana, more in alignment. So I will make an attempt to read the first section. That is what is my goal. It is not very easy, nor am I going to rush through. It may take whatever time it takes, but I will try to hold your attention to some of the key points as they appear, like a school teacher, and hope that it will benefit us. This is a section having about 116 pages. It took me a lot of time to study because there are many references, many different Buddhist scriptures are referred to. So I tend to normally spend time figuring out what that book is all about, what is the essence, and so on. But maybe we will not be necessarily doing that, not necessary. But at least when we go through the text, you will know what are the key ideas that the Buddhists had and why they are relevant to us in our own attainment of peace. This is not an exhaustive book, but this is going to be very introductory, but covers all the important ideas that one should focus on. Based on your interest, you may take up much further detailed study of those. Here in the preface, it says this book sets out to discuss and interpret the main themes of the Buddhist thought in India. The developments of the Mahayana in China and Japan have been omitted for no other reason than that I do not know the languages. This is what Edward Conze is saying, that he could not really summarize what happens in the Chinese Buddhism and the Japanese Buddhism, but we will come to it in some other places. This limitation is not as serious as it sounds. Most of the creative work was done in India, and even Zen is not half as original as it has been made out to be. Because the Zen Buddhism, which is really the work done in Japan, which has really taken interest of a huge population nowadays, obviously it is not an original thought. It has come from India, what we call dhyana, or even to be more Buddhistic, what is taught in the Buddhistic things as vipassana and samatha as we call nowadays. It went to China and transformed in some aspects, and then later went to Japan and became Zen. So that's what Conze is saying here. Most of the creative work was done in India, and even Zen is not half as original as it has been made out to be. So we will have a chance to visit, even digressing from this book, some of the newer thoughts on the Zen side. The time is not yet ripe for the production of a comprehensive academic handbook, and in any case, such an understanding would require much more space than I had at my disposal. There has been no room to do justice to the infinite details of Buddhist philosophizing, and also the references at the end have been kept brief and might have been multiplied indefinitely. The emphasis is everywhere on those aspects of the doctrine which appear to me to be indubitably true or significant. So this is what I really liked reading Professor Conze's book, because here the professor has set his goal of writing this book very objectively. As he says here, there has been no room to do justice to the infinite details of the Buddhist philosophizing, and also the references at the end have been kept brief and might have been multiplied indefinitely. The emphasis is everywhere on those aspects of the doctrine which appear to me to be indubitably true and significant. So he highlights what are doubtless and what are significant aspects of the Buddhist thought, and I'm sure they all come to our aid and help. That is why this book is helpful. Throughout, I have aimed at furthering the understanding as distinct from the bare knowledge of the Buddhist thinking. This is another sentence very useful, and we need to apply the same critical process in our own lives if we want to really realize what the Buddhist nirvana is all about, or the Hindu moksha is all about. Because we are not here interested in a list of different concepts, but we need to gain an understanding of those concepts. Throughout, I have aimed at furthering the understanding as distinct from the bare knowledge of Buddhist thinking. It would have been easier to string together a lot of quotations, but what would have been gained in ostensible erudition would have been lost in demonstrable insight. So here he is comparing two things. One is erudition, ostensible erudition, and the second thing, demonstrable insight. So this is what I'm really interested in, and I think that really helps us gaining a demonstrable insight into the teaching of the Buddhist thought, and the same thing is applicable to the Upanishadic thought. Because I know I have many friends, I listen to many people in my own pursuits, where they lay out the same story as it is mentioned in the books as if they are disconnected pieces. But ultimately at the end of it, we don't gain any insight. So the troubles of life, the trammels of life are never eradicated. So the goal of this study of this great professor is to give a demonstrable insight. In presenting Buddhist philosophy as an intelligible, plausible, and valid system, I have never lost sight of its function as a spiritual method designed to win emancipation from the world. So even though this is a textbook, as he says, he has never lost sight of the function of the Buddhist system as a spiritual method designed to win emancipation from this world, moksha or nirvana. So that as the aim, he analyzes different concepts as they are presented, and he presents us a focus how we should eradicate our own mental issues and gain insight and knowledge. As contrary to the ways of the whole world, has this dharma been demonstrated? As contrary to the ways of the whole world, has this dharma been demonstrated? It teaches you not to seize upon dharmas, but the world is wont to grasp at anything. It teaches you not to seize upon dharmas, but the world is wont to grasp at anything. So even though our life habits has been to grasp at things, here the dharma teaches you not to seize upon the dharmas. So that is the way to study this book, whereby we don't seize upon the dharmas. I know the word dharma can be very difficult for many people. It has been to me for a long time, probably even now. But as we read, the idea becomes very clear, and it is really helpful. Buddhist thought in India had from the very start been planned as a sequel to my Buddhist meditation. This is one thing which I found very interesting, because now Edward Conze also has a book on Buddhist meditation. So whereby you can see how these theories and the concepts are applied when you sit for meditation and work through the mental processes. Even if you take Patanjali Yoga Sutras, though there are many things laid down, but you really do not find a very systematic way, step-by-step way to work through each exercise. That I find the difficulty in Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Though a great deal of very comprehensive stages of meditation have been mentioned in terms of dharana, dhyana, samadhi, and the variety of samadhi in terms of sampragnata and asampragnata, and various samapatti and so on, which is a different topic to be taken up. But there also you do not find a sitting session of how you take the current mental state and analyze and work through it to come out into samadhi. That is not very clearly laid out in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra directly, unless you again go back and fall upon some other teachers who probably will be able to give, and even there I doubt whether there is any concrete way of achieving it, because a lot is left to individual person to struggle through that meditative process. For example, concentration on the sthula, concentration on the sukshma. You don't find too many details within Patanjali Yoga Sutra itself. But fortunately, the Buddhists who have done enormous amount of work on the meditation have laid out a very systematic way to pick up each thought arising in our brains and work through it to see it to its end. So that is what I personally appreciate, and I wanted to encourage any of you to take up this as a systematic exercise. So at least one day by day we make some progress, and after a few years at least we are able to reach a decent state where these mental states don't bother us, and we know we are really never attached to these mental states. So Edward Conze first spent a lot of time, like a Buddhist monk himself, he did practices, and later on he wrote great dissertations on the Mahayana Prajna Paramita. That's what he was most known for. He spent about 30 years of time studying and translating the Sanskrit Prajna Paramita text into English. He was very well known for that, and there is nobody else who has done that much of work, especially into English. Of course, though you have some Sanskrit texts, and he spent his entire life in translating the Ashta Sahasrika and also Sata Sahasrika, and Panchavimsati Sahasrika, means the Prajna Paramita Sutras, Prajna Paramita treatises having 8,000 lines, 25,000 lines and 100,000 lines. And he wrote multiple books, which I will show later on. Great books, and if you read, they are very difficult, but you need patience to study them, and it will definitely provide a lot of relief as a way of commentary on the Upanishads, I would say. Where Upanishads become very secretive and difficult to penetrate, those commentaries really, really help. Buddha's words really, really help in understanding the truth of this Brahman to the extent possible, and slowly disconnect the discursive thought. So that's what I want to appreciate you to take a look at it. Buddhist thought in India had from the very start been planned as a sequel to my Buddhist meditation, which is a collection of the most important traditional accounts of the Buddhist meditational practices. Some familiarity with these practices will greatly assist the reader of this book, which derives the tenets of Buddhist philosophy from the meditational experience of the Buddhist yogins. So the philosophy is derived out of the meditative yogic experience of Buddhist yogis. It's not the other way. It's not a speculative science. So that will definitely help to take up those meditations. In the last couple of years, I repeated myself endlessly that one should do a sitting meditation practice. Bhagavan Sri Krishna also said the same thing. Atma samstham manakrutva nakinchidapi chintayet. The only suggestion of Bhagavan Sri Krishna was also keep yourself within yourself and stop thinking. It's exactly what Buddha said, nothing different. That is what is vipassana. Which is preceded by samatha or samatha, calming the mind and then having an insight. This is what Buddha also said and what Bhagavan Sri Krishna said. All the yogis say the same thing. So it is a very worthwhile thing. And when I said do the sitting meditation practice, I was inspired by obviously the Zen from Bodhidharma onwards. So whatever Chan and Zen traditions have emphasized to Dogen, from I was greatly inspired from Bodhidharma onwards to Dogen in Japan. So who really taught us those ideas in simple words for a common man. So, but I see that not really, many have taken up my suggestion. So it has never further motivated me to talk further. But a few of them, one or two of them at least, keep paying attention to my words and try to be in touch. So for their benefit, I would like to add once in a while. That was what my purpose. So please take up meditation. Without meditation or calming the mind, as Krishna said in the chapter 6 of the Gita, Dhyana Yoga, nothing can be achieved. There are many other words which I can say as the days go by. It is now 30 years since this book was first begun. Its completion has been postponed and its execution partly spoiled by a new threat to quiet contemplation, which even 50 years ago was happily almost unknown and which never troubled the Buddhists at the time when their philosophy took shape. Here we have many distractions, too many noises. So what Edward Conze was saying is, those noises are really disturbing for steady contemplation, because of which no successful work could be done. No jets ever cut them short at the decisive point. The ideas expounded in this book are only too easily disturbed by the hideous and brutish noises emanating from machines of all kinds. The list at present comprises cars, motorcycles, lorries, wirelesses, television sets, electric drills, helicopters, and of course aeroplanes roaring, whining and screaming overhead. I shudder to think what else will have turned up by 1970. This book is written in 1970s, right? Of course, he was writing in 1959 originally, but slowly he's saying what would happen by 1970 he's writing. Now, after that, how much more noise we have in our environment, that the quiet contemplative meditation is really, really difficult. And by the constant interruption of the deep brooding indispensable to the comprehension, and by the constant interruption of the deep brooding indispensable to their comprehension. So, deep brooding is essential. Brooding over means contemplative, thinking through, indispensable to the comprehension of these meditative thoughts. And these noises disturb us. That's what Edward Conze is saying. This almost universal noisiness may well be no more than a secondary symptom of an eclipse which has darkened the spiritual life for many centuries already. This noisiness which is everywhere may well be no more than a secondary symptom of an eclipse which has darkened the spiritual life for many centuries already. So the noisiness is not the main thing. There is further, deeper, primary source of this disturbance. With increasing frequency, I have in recent years been in the grip of the agonizing intellectual paralysis of which Wordsworth spoke when he said in his preface to Lyrical Ballads, which is a Wordsworth poetical work, that a multitude of causes unknown to former times are now acting with a combined force to blunt the discriminating powers of the mind and unfitting it for all voluntary exertion, reduce it to a state of almost savage torpor. So he says unidentified causes are working, so whereby men are under the influence of torpor, the sleepiness, as if. This is Wordsworth's sentences from the Lyrical Ballads, which is quoted by Edward Conze here. And Wordsworth wrote at a time when the English countryside was still unshaken by the eruption of noisy metal boxes. Even the Industrial Revolution certainly somehow connected with the dark clouds which obscured the spiritual life had barely begun. So here what Edward Conze is saying is the Industrial Revolution. To say our so-called industrial technological world is what has been the main cause of the obscuration of the spiritual life as it is envisaged by the Buddhist yogins to the Hindu yogins. So we'll continue again. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.